You did it. Adventure dog is out the river. There are bear tracks everywhere. Big buck tracks coming down. And you want to go check them out, don't you? All right, let's do this. All right, back again. Going to the woods tomorrow for sure. Snack on this candied salmon. Oh my god, this is good. Candied smoked salmon. We got about, I don't know, 60 pounds of it made after the end of last summer. So good. Bad timing. I probably shouldn't have been eating once I hit record here. Should have. Anyway, hold on a minute. Here we go. I was just in the inbox. I've been doing a lot of digging lately, trying to find some people I want to get a hold of again, and emailing them. And I found an email and a person and emailed them, a forestry consultant worker in northern Canada. And while I was in my inbox, I just found this recent email, just came in. It's interesting. I'm going to share it right now. It's titled Photos from Last Summer. Hi, Steve. We went camping last June 2024 near Crescent City, California. Visited the Redwoods and hiked a trail. Lots of dust in my vehicle. After returning home, some dust remained on the back window as seen in the attached photos. At first I thought one of our boys did it, but they all said no. And hair is obvious in the imprint. Enjoy. Well, that's an interesting one, isn't it? It's kind of cool. It's a little odd. One thing that's odd about it, I mean, every single person almost going to go, that's a bear. Including me. But now that I'm really looking at it, there's no pads. There's no pads between the between here and the toes. There's no pad. That's not even possible. A bear can't just put his fingertips on there without the pads being stuck in the window. And another thing that makes me think that this might be something a little weird is the noted greasy fingerprints and hair on these people. It's a pattern. A very oily substance has always been noted many times on windows and imprints on the side of houses and all sorts of shit, but that is a very bizarre imprint, isn't it? But a very small being compared to what people describe, because if you were to get down and get that angle with your forearms and face in the window, you're not that tall. That's like human height, isn't it? But anyway, very interesting, very cool. And I guarantee if somebody's going to knee-jerk and say bear, first off, I don't know what did the imprint on the car. I don't have a clue. But what I can tell you with confidence is a bear touches the window of your car and he's greasy and wet, covered in mud all over the place, he's going to leave the pad. There's going to be pad print on the window, so that's what throws me off. I don't know what did it, but I'm telling you right now, it's really looking like it wasn't a bear to me. Crazy. Very cool. Thank you for that share. Now, this one, many of you would have heard this. And possibly thousands of you haven't. And I wanted to get a hold of this guy because I was going to go into the woods with these guys. Somewhere that they feel a little apprehensive about. And I never did. The forest fires were going absolutely shitty and crazy. Timing, right? Perfect timing. And then I just slide into hunt season. Now listen to this. This is titled Remote Alberta Forestry Consultant Encounters and a Warning. And this email is quite long, but very informative, and it really struck home for me because of some of the areas he's been in, what they do for a living, where they are. Now listen to this. A couple of, I think two of these crew members email me separately. I am JC's former boss. I was his manager at a forestry outfit based out of Peace River. And he now works alone as his own consultant. You don't need to mention this aloud, but Silent black helicopters did buzz my house when he was with me one summer evening. Bizarre. JC's a hard worker that does some of the most remote stuff out there. Driven. He's a very spiritual individual and connected with the land. Modern day shaman. Crazy, right? Oh, and that carries on. I guess that was a note for me. I don't see any harm in sharing what I shared there. Hello, Steve. My name is, withhold name please, active in the industry still. My name is A, and I'm a biologist / environmental consultant in my 30s that has worked solo in the remote northern Canadian and Rocky Mountain wilderness my entire life and career. I grew up in the remote woods of northern Alberta and have worked from the Mackenzie Mountains to Great Bear Lake and down to the Rocky Mountains, ranging from Monashee Provincial Park, Cherryville, and Nakusp to the east slopes of the Rockies along the Forestry Trunk Road in western Alberta. That's BC, Alberta, Northwest Territories, and the Yukon. To say I've seen a lot is an understatement. I was one of only a few full-time consultants that does cut block layout for forestry in Alberta. There are only around a dozen of us in the province that are in the field full-time. Nobody lasts full-time in our position as everyone gets weirded out. There's an interesting statement right there. I myself am now working as a field biologist. I still get to be remote and do layout, now only during the winter sometimes. Most people last a few summers and transition to other things. The work is piecework, it's hard and it's honest. We work alone, and we all know each other. We all know of each other who lasts more than a few seasons. Winter, springer, summer, and fall, we're out there. Laying out cut blocks, timber cruising, or doing forestry plots. It's a great life, rewarding, and one of freedom in determining your own way. We never noticed the pandemic occurred, for instance, but the work is hard. There's bears, storms, frostbite, quad breakdowns, mosquitoes, black flies, etc. Dangerous quadding, sledding, not to mention the helis. The list doesn't end. I will regularly sled 120 kilometers up a frozen cut line, then work all day into the night and sled out. Sometimes needing to hydroplane suddenly melted ponds or dozens of meters, or take a helicopter on a terrain never walked by any man, and work 12 hours straight in a great swamp during the summer. We quad upwards of 120 kilometers plus a day as well come summer, replete with fuel drop-off points on the trails by forestry helicopters. And in our job, we go to places never visited by man, ever. Or it has not been visited for decades. Not even natives go up into the areas we go. Or do they just know better? I can count on my hand the number of times I've run into someone else in these remote areas. Always the local trapper, of course. We often set up camp no matter what time of year, as close we can to get to our work area, often at the end of the road system. Heat, an insulated sled trailer up, and it's comfy as hell. Have some elk steaks in the cooler in the snow, and life is good. We'll camp together for a job and set out in different directions to complete our cut blocks and meet together at the end of the day. I was aware of your channel, as our little group of remote workers have mad respect for your outfitting business, your hunting capabilities, and your ability to go remote like us all the time. We view you as someone to look up to, as you appear to be one of the only other people that goes remote all the time like us. I've done it for 40 years or so. We enjoyed watching your channel for the hunting and wildlife content, along with the bear stories. And we're not in the least bit surprised when you started to mention the other things that exist in the remote wilderness. We always talk about sending a note to you on this topic, but with the level of busy we are and the fact we're always out of service and in the field, it's hard to get something fully together. And it looks like Jay did, though. As well, I'm worried talking about it extensively and overtly, as it seems to attract the phenomena to you. It's sticky. I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt from someone that goes into the bush 300 days a year that the wilderness is haunted by things that most people shrug off as make-believe. It's funny, as most government or mill foresters, the people we do contracts for, won't be caught dead more than a few kilometers at most from the nearest gravel road. Always in a group of 3 as well. Or are they being smart? Haha. Same goes for most hunters. Never ever see them in the real backcountry. Road hunting in the patch isn't hunting. Haha. And when we report back anything that goes against the established narrative, specifically grizzly bear populations, where they are not expected to be, they are throughout most of northern Alberta, unlike what the government clowns say, you get sneered at. As those city-educated bigwigs that never go into the woods know so much better than the boys with their boots in the ground. You can imagine what they would say if we talked about the weirdness and flush goodbye career. It's special knowing that what you are seeing is the first time human eyes have ever seen it. Those places I find are dreamlike and soft, if you know what I mean. I do not even know where to begin, as the phenomena is a weekly to monthly occurrence in remote wilderness. I will call these things things, not forest people or whatever you're currently calling them, as from my experience and my boys' experience, they are some kind of supernatural / extra-dimensional occurrence, not people like you and me. I think the explanation for it is closer to the fairy phenomena than a group of actual people. This is deeply unnerving to me. They, however, appear to be physical beings too. The way they appear and disappear, stalk you, and most of all, smell is downright bizarre, and I cannot explain all of it, or even lay the blame of these occurrences to only Sasquatch. I feel the concept of the Wendigo, the little people, the skinwalkers, and extra-dimensional portals also play into the phenomena that occurs in the wilderness. Let's just say I really pay attention to the Dene mythologies very closely, as they appear to be the only thing that properly explains what occurs on the land. Considering they were here for thousands of years, I'm not the least bit surprised. Mythology of the Dene is literally coming to life. It is in fact unnervingly, in my opinion, not campfire stories, but a history. We really clued in that these things were not, quote, bears, end quote, after I had a close-up encounter with a pissed-off grizzly in 2018, and that stench we had attributed to bears lurking on us was not the stench an actual grizzly close-up had. That sickening BO / rotting flesh / shit smell that can appear daily is not from bears. After I clued into that the woods were almost ruined for me, I smell that damn scent at least once a week, especially spring and summer, early fall. I'm not going to lie. I am terrified of these things. And I have to talk myself down in the truck or helicopter almost every morning, now knowing what's out there. Yet I still go. These things have nearly ruined my ability to do my job, as their presence is too numerous or prominent to ignore, and I fear that one of us eventually will go missing. I no longer tent and consider that suicidal. Coming from what I've experienced in the field, you are nuts to stay in a tent in the remote wilderness. However, I am so curious as to what the phenomena is and how it relates to us, as I experience it so often, and it's just a fact for life for me. Since I'm at home in the woods, I feel the need to share the space with it rather than running away and becoming some city rat to avoid it, as all I've ever known is the bush, and it would be like cutting off my legs if I couldn't experience being in the wilderness on a daily basis. Well, I hear you. Where to begin? First off, I'm writing a book about this topic from my first-hand experiences as a coping mechanism, and with an ever-increasing, sickening feeling in my gut that people need to know about this phenomena for their own safety. That's why I'm finally writing it now. People go missing, specifically in northern Canada and the Rockies, like nothing else. I keep track. It's always brushed off as an incident or they ran off, etc. But I am convinced this is hiding a disturbing underlying fact. It is this phenomena that has to do with it. Inexperienced city people who think they know everything in the mountains, and native women in the north are most often victims. Easy pickings? When it's someone more experienced, I listen in very closely. It's always bizarre. The group of experienced Dene hunters that died north of Fort Chipewyan, Alberta, at Devil's Gate. Always the devil's name, eh? In 2017, and found dead in the water, not drowned, is a prime example. Let me read that again, you guys. That needs some sleuthing. The group of experienced Dene hunters that died north of Fort Chipewyan, 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 Alberta, at Devil's Gate. Bracket, always the devil's names, end bracket. In 2017 and found dead in the water, not drowned, is a prime example. Were they scared to death? Excuse me, unlike the Yankees or Brits that write to you and constantly talk about these things being on land that is heavily populated near cities, I have only experienced this phenomena on the peripheries of settlement and in the most remote wilderness. This makes me wonder about the fantastic stories they send in, or I feel they are talking about a different phenomena from what is confronted in remote, untouched wilderness. I don't think it's all uniform, or it can be attributed only to the big man. The first inkling that something was off in the bush was that sulfur/BO/rotting flesh shit smell becoming frequent. I started noticing this smell initially in the Chinchaga Hills on the Alberta-BC border in the Peace Country, specifically up the Chinchaga Hall Road. Been up there. I had noticed it early on as well, north of Bear Canyon on the border as well. This has expanded to nearly everywhere I go. The greatest occurrence that stands out is in the Swan Hills, especially south towards Fort Assiniboine and west past Goose Mountain, as well around Hawk Hills near the Mackenzie Highway, south of High Level, near Twin Lakes, Lesser Slave Lake, specifically towards Martin Mountain, specifically at the top, and in the Albertan Rockies, specifically remote Banff National Park, Kananaskis Country, anything east of Canmore, Waiparis, and throughout the area of the Forestry Trunk Road from Waiparis north to Nordig and Catamount/Rob. Excuse me. As well up the DMI East Hall Road on the east side of the Peace River. Interesting of note for you, in my experience, remote Alberta is far more bizarre, weird, and creepy than BC or the northern parts of the territories. Southern Northwest Territory, however, is just as creepy and off as Alberta. However, the Swan Hills and Martin Mountain by Slave Lake take the cake for weirdness, by far. I really wonder why. Second is the Forestry Trunk Road around Rob/Catamount, down to Waiparis. Anywhere off the road, it gets weird. This is drastically more frequent than BC, at least where I've worked. North/south of Revelstoke, Monashees, Salmon Arm, Golden Cusp, Fort St. John, and the territories. The first real weird experience I had was on the Confor Road, 20 kilometers south of Chinchaga Road, and another 10 kilometers up a trail in thick lodgepole pine in the Chinchaga Hills. This is also the general area where a forestry worker was found dead and half consumed by predators in the 90s, blamed on a bear. It was a perfect, untouched stand where nobody had done any forestry work in before. And on that day, trees kept getting knocked down closer and closer to me as I was laying out a block for the local sawmill. It was a calm day, and big 30-meter tall trees kept coming down just out of eyesight. I attribute it to a pissed-off grizzly wanting me out of the area. I ran into one a week later by there. But this experience came with a sense of something being very wrong. It gave me a fear response to leave. After smelling that smell, I left the stand, and to this day, I never got laid out. Sorry, it never got laid out. Other guys in the crew had something scream/roar at them that they felt in their bones a kilometer away on an overgrown line the very next day after I pulled out. We attributed it to a cougar, but I feel now it's one of those things. Often while working, I would smell that smell and get a sense of being watched intently and needing to leave. Now, a couple times I would hear trees and vegetation breaking toward me, causing me to wanting to avoid a bear encounter and hightailing it out of the bush for the day. However, now in hindsight, every bear or every mountain lion encounter I actually had never came with that feeling or that smell. The next weird experience of note, I was on Bassett Mountain, north of the Chinchaga Hills and south of Rainbow Lake, that has no road access, and the only way in is a helicopter ride from Rainbow Lake or high level. I was running a crew in an A-Star and had dropped off all my boys to different parts of the mountain. The mountain had been inaccessible for heli landings, but a forest fire the year before opened up the top of the mountain for heli landings, hence opening up the area for forestry work. The idea was to lay it all out, and they would cut a line from the Rainbow Lake Highway down south to it, come winter, as the swamp/muskeg surrounding the hill form was inaccessible, besides in an Argo outside of winter. From the LiDAR scans given to me in the package, I was going into a 40-meter tall pumpkin block at the crest of the mountain. A hill in actuality. I told my pilot to bed down where he landed in the burn, all burnt birch, and to wait for me, as it was 1.5 kilometers to walk in through birch forest and was a small block. It would be quick for me to analyze, likely a few hours to 3 at the most. We landed around noon and off I went. It was a warm June day, over 30 degrees Celsius and windy. The sky was a perfect blue without a cloud, bluebird. And as I walked through the birch forest, I could see birds teetering, squirrels chittering, and the woods waving in the wind. I even saw some hares bounding about. It was a beautiful June day. I couldn't get any better. It couldn't get any better. As I got closer to the stand, the forest went from birch to aspen. The old spruce and fir forest that I was to lay out looked like a line in the sand. Beyond the aspens, huge 40-meter tall pumpkins lay ahead of me. The forest was beautiful, trees covered in moss, ferns all around. It looked like a dream. A babbling brook went between them. I guessed to myself I was the first person to ever lay eyes on this place. I walked about 10 meters into the stand when a voice in my head, in my voice, but not my own thought, told me that if I walk any further more that I would die, and that I needed to leave now. I stopped and was completely baffled. I was doing work for the local high-level mill, and they wanted as much wood as possible, and were being hustled to complete the package. Not doing the block would result in me making no cash for the day, as we got paid a piece rate by the work we did, not hourly or a day rate. As well, I would piss off the mill, as they were paying for the helicopter. Thousands of dollars a day. The longer we were out, the more it would cost. I was befuddled as to why that thought had entered my head. I went and sat down at the base of one of these couple-meter wide spruce trunks facing into the block down the slope and looked around. Right then, I realized that the forest was dead still, like a graveyard. No birds, no squirrels, no life. The air wasn't moving. It was stagnant. No wind. The air was thick and oppressive, almost as if any voice I'd utter out loud would be absorbed by my surroundings. There must be a boar grizzly or a cougar lurking on me, I thought, looking around. Something was off. It was very odd. Excuse me. The forest was quiet, and I realized that damned BO sulfur-rotting stench smell was present. I realized that it was now cold here, even though it was a 30-degree-Celsius day. That's when I realized that in front of me, a bit down the slope, about 10 meters or so, was some kind of mirage. You'd see it on a hot day on the highway, but it was as if my consciousness could not articulate what I was looking at. My brain couldn't compute an image. It just sat there, shimmering in a way. Sort of a liquid. It's messed up, I thought. F that. I looked up and saw a gray sky. One that was blue moments ago. Something was very, very off. Again, a voice was put in my head and said, "Stay and you die. Leave now." I could feel deep in my soul that if I stayed in this spot, I wasn't coming out of the woods. I got up and hightailed it out of there. I spent tops 10 minutes in that stand and walked only 10 meters in. I ran out of there and all the way back to the helicopter. I got back to the heli. My pilot was spitting pissed. Where the hell were you? What the F is up? I'm blind here. When a heli is bedded down, they can't radio you at all. I replied that I was in the stand for a second only and got back quick. He should chill out. And he replied, I thought you said you'd be a couple hours. I told him I was less than that. He said, bro, you were in there 6 effing hours. It's past 6. What the F? Everyone's waiting for us. My heart stopped. I remember every second in that stand, and I was there for 10 minutes, not 6 hours. My blood ran cold. The sky again was blue and was still hot as hell. It turned into a huge shit show as all my workers were supposed to be back at the airbase in high level between 5 and 6, and we were still on the mountaintop, having not picked up anyone else. 3 other guys, yet, who were located out of radio contact all over the mountain, different places. I had the waypoints on my iPad, where to pick them up, so no flying could happen. We flew back late, and I ended up getting rode up by the mill for it. Major shit. I don't know what happened out there. I still don't. All what I know is that I remember being in there for 10 minutes, and every second I recall, and 6 hours went by. Did I run into a soft spot in reality? Us boys have a theory that in places on the earth where humans haven't been, or in a place with literal nature spirits, present time runs different. You feel dreamy, have a different state of awareness. But I feel as if this was something else. Did I run into a portal? I saw that damn mirage, which I haven't seen since, and the sky was a different color there. Did I run into fairies, little people? There is mythology of Malign, pronounced Meline, Canyon in Jasper National Park being the location of a great underground cavern system that would house little people. Not proper spelling, but pronounced Asinawacha, whom would steal women and children from the indigenous peoples there. So much so they abandoned the Athabasca and Malign River Valley. It was only settled by runaway Iroquois from Ontario in the mid-1800s before promptly being turned into a park. They went to the last unsettled area available and purposely unsettled due to the problems stated. Then in the 20th century, geologists discovered there in fact is a huge underground river and cave system, one of the largest on the planet, but the entrance has not yet been found. It's supposedly covered in glacial rubble, or is it open somewhere? Was there one of those hairy giants things lurking by me? I have a feeling they can cloak. Was that the mirage? There was no shape to it, though. I only have questions from that encounter. No answers. What I can say is that from that point on, the weird stuff has sped up for me. Was I touched? Did I get marked by something? Imprinted? Almost as if the woods are aware that you are aware of it. Is it the forest itself? Nature spirits? It disturbs me to this day as I lost hours and cannot account for more than a few minutes. But I can't help but feel that time just flowed different for me. Just one bizarre experience out of many. I was actually forced to go back to the block a few months after, as they wanted it laid out, and they were incredulous as to why I didn't do it. The next time I went in, it was completely normal. A beautiful place with no time slowing, weird silences or smells or bizarre voices. Something interesting to note was that on both sides of the block was steep ravines about 50 meters deep that I had a GPS. At the base of these were beautiful fern-lined creeks, but there was also the presence of caves in one ravine. I did not go in, and I got out of there after. The geology of northern Alberta is not conducive to caves, so it is very rare and weird. The next set of bizarre happenings worth mentioning was when an employee and I were camping at the end of the road system on the north edge of the Swan Hills. We were quadding around 70 kilometers one way into multiple areas around Lightbulb Lake that proved impossible for anyone else to access. This is almost directly west of Goose Mountain, The local Slave Lake mill is really cheap and wouldn't pay for a helicopter to ferry us, so all we got were fuel drops for our quads instead. We made camp at the end of the gravel road, almost an hour south of High Prairie, and socked in for the next few weeks. I was training a worker, so I wasn't completely alone in the woods. We would do blocks together, and I would send him to GPS creeks. While I would GPS boundary. The biggest task was quadding up a decommissioned haul road that hadn't been used in 2 decades, where we had to ford every creek and river as the bridges were pulled. Clay-rich Alberta in June was wet and muddy, so it was quite interesting. On top of that, our temporary bridges, where we could make them, kept getting knocked out in frequent thunderstorms, so we were starting to get behind on a job. We were rained out. The levels on the East Prairie River were too high to ford and our quads, so we had to spend 3 days marooned at bush camp, waiting for the levels to go down. Being out of service, away from our girls, and with not much to do, we did exactly what you'd expect us to do. We let her rip. Booze, weed, and a huge bag of mushrooms my worker had got awaited us. The first night, the boys gobbled the entire bag. My worker had an Aboriginal drum and started banging on it and hollering a sacred song to the sky as we sat at the fire. Not long later, we noticed an orange ball of light in the sky directly over us. It started dancing and moving in a great circle in the sky. It was not far off the ground as it was glowing, the fog surrounding it. It creeped us out. I went inside my RV and tried to go to bed. My worker kept drumming and singing to the dancing light. I remember looking out my window before I fell asleep to my worker still over the fire drumming and singing as the light danced above. The next night of us waiting for the river to go down was low-key without any booze or mushrooms. My expectation was for it to be a normal night in the wilderness. When it started to get dark around 12 at night, my workers called me to get out of the RV. "You won't believe this," one said. Up in the sky again was that orange ball of light, with another one by it, moving around each other, playing in the sky. My heart felt heavy as I realized that last night's events were no tired hallucination. My worker exclaimed excitedly that we had summoned them. Did the mushroom use light us up like fireflies in another dimension? How did we attract this? I was amazed and curious by the presence of these things, but terrified too. One moved down to the edge of the forest clearing just above the treetops, and for some reason, I felt compelled to go see it up close. I jumped on my quad and busted off after it. It was playing hide and seek with me behind the trees, bounding ahead every few seconds. My workers were screaming at me to come back, but I was intent on finding this thing. I should mention we were camped on a 50-acre opening on the very last grazing lease along the river. And that thing went along the edge of the trees and popped out over the river. I almost drove off a sheer cliff in the dark. It tried to drive me off the cliff. Creeped out, I drove back to camp and retired to bed. The next night again, some lights showed up again. We drove up to the closest hill with service and phoned our buddy from the wildfire base near High Prairie to come and check them out. And he came, was freaked out, and left. He called the light Space Jesus. The phenomena has now presented itself most nights when camping in the wilderness since then, and even followed me home to my place on the Freeman River by Fort Assiniboine. They would constantly play hide and seek with you in the trees, trying to get you to follow them deeper into the woods. Sometimes many would show up. I've seen orange, yellow, white, and blue-white coloration. I've since moved to the east slopes of the Rockies, and the phenomena continues to present itself. This fact is the most unnerving part of my experience in the wilderness. I can't help but feel that mushrooms used open something up to enable these things better noticing us. Yeah, you never know. Maybe, right? The phenomena, in a sense, can tag you. The more aware you are of it, the weirder the phenomena becomes. It's sticky. The other day after the last orb encounter, The river was finally low enough for us to traverse and push deep into the Swan Hills, where there is no oil or forestry activity, or anything for the matter. My one worker who hadn't been home, AW, and I pushed ahead. Crossing the East Prairie River to the other side, the vibe felt unbelievably off as we rolled up the valley. As if we were being observed. As if we disturbed something from its peace and quiet. Was it the forest itself? We had to quad around 70 kilometers inland to the furthest reaches of our project. Always do the far hard-to-reach areas first. Closer and easier second. And we were near Lightbulb Lake. We came to a nice open lodgepole pine stand along the large creek that was covered in older brush in the valley. We both stopped our quads on the line around 75 meters from the creek bed. We're going to go to the creek and work to the left of the line and our quads, going along the creek edge and making a large circle back to our quads. We could get 6,000 meters for the day if we hit it right. And as we started walking down the line, we noticed some large black mass laying in the alders. I was having none of it and thought a big bear was bedded down for the day, and I yelled at it to F off. That's when this thing stands up, 2 to 3 feet above the 7-foot tall alder, with its back to us, and walks away from us right into the middle of our cut block. This thing, it walked away on 2 legs, and that was no bear. And as we were under the gun, thanks to the weather, we couldn't chance the day and run away. We couldn't cancel the day and run away. We rationalized it as a bipedal bear for a few steps. We could lose our mill contract if we didn't complete it. We continued our day. It was windy that day. Throughout the entire day, whenever the wind shifted, that oppressive stank would hit us right in the face. I now realized that thing was potentially feet away from us, hiding behind a tree or hill, following us through the woods the entire day. I shudder at the thought. We split a few hours later as my worker couldn't handle the vibes and the smell anymore. And again, we split early, but got a good amount of work done for the day. I'll never ever forget that thing. Got up and walked away from us. Ever. And how we minimalized it immediately after. We never saw a face, just its back, and that it walked on 2 feet, and was for all intents and purposes a giant hairy thing. Are the Orbs and that thing related? Did we summon that thing? I doubt it. Did we run into it by chance? We never ended up going to that area again, as everything felt just so off. That area of the Swan Hills is by far the creepiest, weirdest feeling place I've been to in the wilderness, and I've been to a lot of it. The rest of the job there was the queerest sense of being watched. It occurred everywhere in that area. We got moved off not even a week later. I would drop 20-hectare patches of forest due to the being... I would drop 20-hectare patches of forest due to being so creeped out and weirded out, and got major shit for it too. Had a sense that the RV was being watched as well. Those orbs floating around the trees at night don't help either. And over the next while, weird experiences would start to occur to us along the Freeman River, where I'd purchased a homestead. Orbs, screams, and weird hoots echoed through the property. A deer leg turned up at the top of a deciduous tree and gradually skeletonized. I blamed it on a cougar, but it was 13 meters up an aspen poplar on the small branches on the top that couldn't hold a large cat. The house along the river was a total hotspot for wildlife. Elk, grizzly, black bear, moose, lynx, mountain lion, muleys, and whitetail. All just out your window. Paradise. But weirdness presented itself quickly. The house was slapped right on the wall where our bed was located multiple times with my spouse and I in bed. It was a one-level ranch house. The front door also would get hit, and one night opened wide up after the noise. We would close our curtains at night as we both couldn't help but feel intently watched through our 10-foot bay windows in the bedroom that opened up to a 5-acre meadow in the forest. We did not want to see the lights. We would hear sounds on the roof as if something was walking on it, but never saw anything. And my employees, which would camp on the river on the property, swore they saw something huge, bigger than a bear, crawling and observing them in the alders on the other side of the river, right at water level when they were having a fire one night. It was dubbed the giant beaver. The orbs are always a frequent phenomenon at the riverbank. They started putting apples and kokanee beer out on the river rocks, and they would be taken regularly. Again, we had no neighbors and no tourists, fishers, or even hunters. Nobody comes out there. It's weird to report, I know, but where we are, this phenomena is almost normalized. There were no neighbors, so no baseline, and we weren't affected at all, besides being creeped out. There are stories of these lights in the region too, and it's something just ignored and swept under the rug. Interesting to mention, lightning, even though we are in a river valley, frequently strikes that property, to the extent almost every tree has a scar. That's interesting. Sleuths, take note of that. Another weird thing to note, the phenomena picked up once we became aware of it, and I can't help but feel something deep in the forest where I once went noticed me and is now intrigued. It's sticky. In the summer 2019 was a very weird season. I was very busy with work around High Level and Slave Lake. I was training a worker how to do layouts, so I spent a good part of the summer guiding someone through the woods. We were working initially up the DMI East Hall Road, and at the very end of it where it turns to grassy dirt, we were quadding 60 kilometers further east into swampland. Had some weird tree breaks when we had split up and got an overwhelming sense of being followed in there. It was so overwhelming I canceled the job and pulled out. The next job is in the Hawk Hills, south of High Level at a place called Twin Lakes. It's an upland summit overlooking the Peace River / High Level lowlands. You can see very far from its top. We initially worked on the east side of the Mackenzie Highway up by the fire tower. Within a few days, the vibes were becoming off. Thick forest covered the top of the mountain by the lookout. You couldn't see more than a meter in front of you. And I smelt that smell that is becoming famous. I sensed that all the fir trees were staring at me and mad at my presence. The most bizarre feeling. I could hear something walking through the forest after me. When I would walk, it would. I could catch it when I unexpectedly would stop. I realized that I was being followed. I get out of there running through the fir jungle to get my quad. The job on the other side of the highway finished, and we started to focus on a 25-kilometer line to the west. I paired up with my trusty worker, and we busted up the trap line. It was a different kind of forest, with a sandy soil, huge aspen in the open. Buffalo berry, soapberry forest grew there. Great and quick to walk through and lay out cut blocks. One day we pulled up to a 60-hectare block south of the road that traced a large wetland complex. It was open aspen forest with no understory where you could see in any direction for hundreds of meters. One of the most memorable forests I've ever been in. Also, the greatest number of soapberry bushes I've ever seen in one place as well. My worker and I split up and started to timber cruise the block to ascertain the amount of wood present. The block was interesting. However, I noticed in this still, windless, and quiet forest I was getting the sense of being watched. I could feel eyes on me. The only other people in the region was the trapper by the Mackenzie, and he told us he was going up another trail in the opposite direction that day. I looked around, and in every direction saw nothing. But something was giving me the heebie-jeebies. I radioed my worker to ask if he himself feels off, and he replied that he too was weirded out. I told him to wrap up and come towards me as if there were maybe a bear or lion lurking. We need to be in a group for more safety. Then the smell hit like a freight train, that rotting BO sulfury smell. I went to track down what was making that damn smell, and with our noses guiding us, we could go anywhere in the stand as it was so open, so we started off. The foreboding got worse, but thanks to being able to see in every direction, and we saw nothing out of the ordinary, we continued on. A few hundred meters later, the smell became extreme. It was as if the source was next to us, on top of us. I was getting frustrated and looking around in every direction to find the source of the smell. And as I was looking around, I should mention, it was a stagnant, humid, hot day. There was no wind present. I noticed that the huge 30-meter aspen my worker was at, the base of, was moving. I looked up and the top of the tree was swaying in the canopy. If anything, it was slowly getting more extreme. The smell was ominous. The feeling of being watched was weirding us out, and the lone tree was shaking in the canopy with nothing in it. We, not understanding why the tree was now violently shaking, ran back to our quads. And on the way back to the trap line, we came in on a dead baby mountain lion that was on the forest path. It appeared to have been placed there only in the few hours we were there. That was too much for us, and we switched to a different block 20 kilometers away. All what I know is that there was something in that tree. What it was or why it was there is up to speculation. In 2019, there was a large forest fire on the Martin Mountain, northeast of town of Slave Lake. I was called in to do salvage layout. And Martin Mountain is a lone mountain, a relic from the Ice Age with temperate subalpine forests at the top, like in Swan Hills. In other words, the most productive forest in Alberta. The Devil's Club is from hell there, though. But it was thankfully all burned. There's a large population of grizzly bears, thanks to its productivity, so you're always aware and armed out there. Interestingly enough, a Sasquatch sighting by a family bear hunting occurred 10 kilometers south of my area by Mitsu in June of that year. I believe the father filmed the thing throwing chunks of mud feet across the family as he had stopped and walked into the woods to see what it was. Red eyes in the night have also been reported around here on the Hall Road recently, at the top of Martin Mountain, directly next to the new hydro line that had been put in, where you get a view of the North Country for hundreds of kilometers. I ran into a trackway on a burnt-out creek adjacent to the hydro line, one in front of the other, walking in an ash-strewn creek bed. I was dumbfounded as my size 12 boots were dwarfed by the size of these huge, giant human footprints. It was walking in the creek, not 10 kilometers away from where it was recorded a month before. My one worker was followed in this open burned forest 5 kilometers away from here by a hairy thing walking upright, following him at a distance as he ribboned off the remaining patches of the green wood. When you went into the green patches, the feeling in your gut telling you to leave now was overwhelming. I could not stay in those thick vegetation patches, and we knew something was in it. A few weeks later, when I was in a ravine, something ran by me above the bench, and I could feel the vibrations in the earth. I was shaken by the vibrations. The feeling in my gut to leave was so extreme I couldn't stay in that block. I ran 3 kilometers overland back to my quad and never returned to that spot again. I was working far away from any person, and I was being followed. I could smell that smell and could not get this idea out of my head to get out, so I did. And there was something on that mountain with me. And again, however, I saw nothing, unlike my worker. A quick overview of other things and important thoughts from life experience in the wilderness. There are teepee structures everywhere in the woods. It dawned on me they weren't made by people, and I'll attach a video of one in the southern Northwest Territories on a heli job hundreds of kilometers from the road system. It's not just sticks, but logs stacked. I see these structures again most frequently in the Swan Hills and other areas in northern Alberta. I've seen some really good ones in the Monashees right up against the provincial park as well. They are so common as to it becomes redundant. I've also heard my mother's and recently deceased grandfather's voice call me for help in the woods when I'm hundreds of kilometers north of Slave Lake in the middle of nowhere. That's alarming. It was a heavily blow-down stand. It was calling me to go down into a lower area further into the mire. To hear those voices of my two favorite family members, it made my blood run cold. Clearly calling me for help. It was cold and rainy that day on top of it, and I got the hell out of there. In Dene mythology, Wendigo can peer into your subconscious and use the voices of beloved family members to beckon you over to them. I have experienced something like this, and that reality makes me sick. That's frickin' alarming as shit. A former worker of mine, AW, is adamant. He saw some skeletonized upright deer thing on the Freeman River, right at the bridge on the way to Goose Lake. It chased after him. This was on the first full moon of March in 2020. A Wendigo? Pakakos? A skinwalker thing? That smell is experienced at least once a week. It is what it is. The feeling of being watched is at least once a week too. It is what it is. If it gets too strong, I leave. I no longer care about the financial penalty. I noticed it gets weirder in fir forest for whatever reason. Same for extremely luscious vegetation in ravines. I've heard screams like a woman being murdered too many times in the bush in the evening, once before a storm hit. Almost every weird experience by me has occurred along a creek or a river. Take note of all these things he's saying, you guys. There are weird orbs of light in the woods. They appear in wilderness almost nightly if you're paying attention. This phenomena is the thing to fear, and I feel is most likely responsible for missing people. I don't know what it is, but it's not friendly and trickster-like. It could be associated with the Wendigo and Sasquatch, but this isn't guaranteed. I feel it's interdimensional, which sounds ludicrous. According to Dene mythology, there are portals to other worlds and supernatural creatures such as Wendigo, Sasquatch, Pakakos, little people, thunderbirds, and nature spirits can move between worlds through these. These portals are in permanent spots and some can move. There is a story in my community about how biologists doing a rare plant survey in Banff National Park found this beautiful boulder up in the Alpine with a pool at the base of it that was rectangular and had beautiful, perfect, purple wildflowers growing around it. There was a mist about it. They GPSed the point from a distance with the intention to visit the next day. When they returned, it was gone, nowhere to be seen. What was it? According to Dene lore, little people are strong nature spirits with lots of spiritual energy. Often in pristine forests, boulder fields, and mountain caves, they can be happy or mad with you, fickle. They can be very dangerous. They have elemental control of the weather. There is a cave art that is among the oldest North American in the Rockies of Alberta that shows some horned thing that reminds me of the Wendigo and a giant, among other things. Age of the art is upwards of 10,000 years old. Has a mammoth in it. I've run into Aboriginal graveyards in wilderness and have seen nighttime lights there as well. When you're in the wilderness for long periods of time and spend most of it out there, your intuition gets better. You're damn straight it does. You're more aware. Situational awareness. You can feel things. Things are softer, more moldable. Senses become more acute. The forest is a sensory overload. When you take it all in regularly, you notice deviations from the normal quiet quickly, i.e. the, quote, pressure, end quote. Once along the Athabasca in September, I was walking into the night and one of the lights followed my truck 40 kilometers back to the highway along the bush road that paralleled the river. A good friend, a very accomplished forestry consultant, refuses to go out without a live GPS feed of his location beamed to some satellite that sends the cavalry when he doesn't move for a bit. Overkill? Not so sure anymore. He doesn't want the phenomena to get him. I think it is smart to have an EMF meter and Geiger counter with you in the woods. If they go off, leave. Something is causing a disturbance on the electromagnetic band, and I'm convinced this could help you avoid it. The phenomena is increasing in intensity. It's becoming more apparent, showing itself more often. What's the next step? It's not static. Magic mushroom usage attracts anomalous activity. Not sure why, but it does. Weird activity is greatest in the areas where people most rarely go. I feel the smell might not only be Sasquatch, it could be Wendigo, or some other thing, or it comes from a portal opening. I feel there are areas where the time flows differently, at least temporarily in the wilderness. The central point of this flow could be a portal to another world. It sounds nuts, I know, but I don't know how else to explain what happened to me. My partner was hiking the Three Sisters Parkway Trail, specifically on Wind Ridge Trail in Kananaskis Country, by Dead Man's Flats one summer evening with her girlfriends. It was late and misty, and a storm front was setting in, and she heard whistling up a random cut line off the trail. I think it was someone lost blowing their whistle. Thinking it was someone lost blowing their whistle, she went up this line in the dark a few kilometers to assist them. Her friends stopped following her, and she ended off the line in the woods, down a dry creek bed, still hearing that whistle, with it getting ever louder. The ground started to physically shake from deep within the creek bed, and things got weird. It was no hiker. She got the hell out of there and met up with her girlfriends again. They phoned the park helpline over it, and were told that unknown whistles along the trail are constantly reported in, and that they shouldn't worry about it. Weird, hey? Wow. Have heard bipedal footsteps in a mountain creek, ghost wilderness, tenting, and an audible change in the noise of the creek, like it got dampened. And the noise reversed when something bipedal went through it. This was after seeing that light in the woods near the campsite. It needs to be recognized that there are multiple things out there that in no way have a normal explanation, yet they exist. It's not just Sasquatch. Indigenous mythology right now best explains baseline reality in the wilderness. I've seen trackways twice, both directly walking up and down creek beds. One in the Swan Hills, and the other, the Martin Mountains, both around Lesser Slave Lake. I had a rock thrown at me on a mountainside, sliding by cattlemen doing burn piles in February. I was alone with nobody around. Being watched vibes were strong, and a tree was knocked over my pathway on my sled ride back to the haul road. That's why I bring a chainsaw every time anywhere I go now. I've advised people to do that too. Bring a chainsaw, just for that. One time in the western Swan Hills, the old Russian N and I were sledding down a pipeline back to Sunset House from the interior of the hills. It was after dark in mid-February, and I could not shake the sensation of being constantly watched from just the lip of the forest edge. Multiple times a moose spooked and ran out of the woods into the middle of the line, with us almost striking them. I've never experienced that before or since. Something I felt was out there with us, escorting after dark. The amount of trees knocked over on my quad and forest paths while you were out in the woods is too frequent to put to chance. Most frequently ran into the remote western parts of the Swan Hills. I've heard whistles myself in the woods. Never whistle back and never follow. The wilderness peaks in the most productive elk country. The weirdness peaks in the most productive elk country. 1, the Swan Hills. 2, the east slopes of Alberta. Are native spirits real? Are wilderness spirits fickle and try and kill you like in a freaking fantasy novel? Tree breaks and structures are everywhere. You ignore it eventually. You see logs driven into the ground when muddy, often along pipelines, roads, and hydro lines. Trees get knocked down in the woods by you way too often, and often never in windy conditions. Tree knocks. They happen almost as a warning, let you know they are there. Often happens when on or around lines walking. There is a trickster motive to the phenomenon, and it's aware that you are aware. It's always one step ahead. And avoid boulder fields, especially when you smell that weird smell. Avoid Devil's Gap, Devil's Head Mountain, named after piles of human skulls the giants would put at the base of the mountain along the Ghost River. Devil's Thumb, the Ghost River, Pacacos Mountain and the east shore of Lake Minnewanka, and Ghost Lakes, used to be called Windigo Lake, in the front country of Alberta near Waparius. Even Mount Yamnuska, specifically behind the mountain to the north into the Ghost Wilderness. All those areas are very close in proximity to each other and named for the phenomena that occurred there from prehistoric times. It is obvious that those names that east of Canmore, in the front country, these things have a historical presence. There is a creek that comes down from behind Yamnuska that crosses Highway 1A by the Stony Nakota Lodge. That ravine goes to the Bow River. Stony oral history has those things using the creek to travel to the Bow from their territory up the mountain for seasonal food sources. Most sightings to this day are around this creek, and sightings are frequent there still. I have a neighbor that is a nurse and does volunteer youth work with the Morley Stony Nakota Reserve that I now live next to and mentioned above. They went on a hike with these kids above the Bow Valley in the front country into Douglas Fir Forest for a youth improvement initiative. The youth coordinators noticed tree structures in the Douglas firs. She remarked how cool it is that the kids in the reserve were building nest structures and tree forts in the trees. The children remarked that they were not responsible for these structures, and that their parents and old folks warned them that the things that built there are dangerous, and that they must leave that area immediately. They were told to never look the tree things in the eyes. That ended the fun, and they got out of there. The tallest Sasquatch reported have been in the Nordegg/Abraham Lake area and south down to Waparius. They average over 10 feet in reports, and the tallest was estimated to be 15 feet during construction of the Bighorn Hydro Dam that created Abraham Lake in 1969. Why such tall specimens here? When people go missing there, it is often a random, unexpected rain or snow event. Why are some missing people found dead in water but not drowned? Weird shit happens in the wilderness during thunderstorms. The electrical energy and potential that develops does something to the surrounding environment that enables weird stuff to happen more easily. Excuse me, this is a long way. I'm almost losing my voice. The fact that government refused to recognize it and paper over the missing people in the wilderness is disconcerting. As well, the push for more urbanization is everywhere. What do they know that we don't? It cannot be good. It's dangerous at night out there. Those lights are out there. If you are alone and inexperienced and are aware of them, you're playing with fire. All long-term forestry consultants know the woods is off. They are aware that something else is out there and going on. And I'm one of them. And I am one of the most remote workers in the country. And I give you an emphatic warning. Be safe and aware in the wilderness. This line of work I come from is solo and dangerous. Real wilderness every day. People who stay in it see things. There are more forestry consultants that can speak more about the phenomena. A, D, J, and N. N. N himself has almost 40 years of daily being in the field. Looks like Jay has now. I'm encouraging you guys to write and discuss what we deal with on a frequent basis. It's not specifically the big man, but the constant weirdness, the lights, the watching, the smell. People need to know. There are few people on this earth that work in remote real wilderness like us. We need to speak up and warn everyone how dangerous it is really out there and what is occurring out there on the land. The forests of Alberta are weird. They're mystical and bizarre. There is a definitive hint of the supernatural. Most won't admit that, but I have no other explanation for what I have experienced in the wilderness. Most of the land here has never felt a permanent human presence, and if it is, it's new. It has been determined that only 10,000 Native Americans were in the entire province of Alberta at time of settlement, and most were on the plains chasing bison. The forests of Alberta were nearly untouched. It is weirder than the forest in BC, and I'm aware how off it is in the British Columbia. The remote parts of the Swan Hills take the cake. I personally think it's a good thing that people don't go into the woods, because if anybody completely inexperienced went in regularly, I think there would be more disappearances. And eventually the government would have to say something, which could cause a change in the phenomena to it being more dangerous. I am shocked there isn't more incidents. The woods are dangerous, and where there is no infrastructure, they are deadly. And there's something weird going on out there that is unexplainable. People go missing in the woods all the time. Why? What is responsible for the phenomena? I don't have a clue. Not a clue. Some speculation, maybe. If we follow mythology as history model, I'm unsure if it is a Sasquatch only. I think the Wendigo is out there too. Little people, thunderbirds, skinwalkers, and God knows what else. There is a superior, non-human intelligence playing with us and those trickster guys. That I'm sure. I don't trust the orbs of light in the woods. My gut tells me no. The government has no control over it, so it is content to ignore it. I don't think we are safe as you feel out there. There is no guarantee of safety in the backcountry. Something could change one day in regards to reactions the phenomena is giving off, and I'm scared it'll become more dangerous in the future. The phenomena is ramping up over time. Knowing this, it's insane to be inexperienced and go out in the backcountry. Be careful, be aware, have situational awareness. Wilderness is dangerous. Look over your shoulder, carry a big gun, and don't poke at the phenomena. I attached the video of the log teepee structure in the remote Northwest Territories during helicopter work south of Enterprise, as well as the photo of the Aboriginal pictographs in the front country of the Alberta Rockies next to all those weird-sounding place names. Let me know if there's anything more I can personally do to stay safe in the field. My focus is mitigation at this point, not proof. Regards, A. There you go. I don't recall reading that in one go, that's for sure. But that's one hell of a first-hand account, and from a sector of human beings in the work world that I have absolute curiosity of. I would love to hear from the forestry, the timber cruisers, all the time if I could. That's what my grandfather was doing when he ran into that being face to face that one July day in the sunshine beside a creek. There you go. Take from what you will, leave it. But that's a voice we need to listen to, right? Amongst many others, but there you go. Whew. All right. Time to go feed the animals. Get my gear ready to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, hit the woods. And I'll take you guys with us tomorrow too. I'll be back later.
Yeah, just in the middle of the woods. Cool. Yeah, what's this? Hey? Yep. Okay. Oh yeah, broken on top. Ah!